Hi, welcome everyone to Pratt Institute's Spring 2021 Earth Action Week's closing event, um, Green Jobs for a Just Recovery. This Pratt Earth Action Week is going to continue the focus that we have been examining since the onset of the pandemic around the ongoing and intersecting crisis of climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the racial and social justice protests that have brought into relief systemic inequalities and unsustainable systems in New York City and beyond. This Earth Action Week is going to also align with the creative and forward-thinking and solutions-driven spirit of the Pratt community to focus on the theme of a just, sustainable, and prosperous recovery, and how we can use this moment or work through this moment as a way to not just build back to what was there before, but to do something better and do something more equitable and more just and more environmentally sustainable. The spring event's theme is thus recover, renew, and reconnect. We've had a wonderful series of events. There is an amazing student work exhibit of over 60 submissions on the Pratt Sustainability Center website. And we're really proud to have a great panel of alumni and partners of Pratt and its GCB department and other faculty and students here today. And I'm going to hand it over now to the leaders of environmental advocacy at Pratt and Pratt Disaster Resilience Network, two student groups that have organized this panel. So Ben, Liana, and Agatha, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have everyone here and to hear some great talks and to provide some great space to really get to know what folks are doing in this field. This is a unique time in history for climate jobs, given the federal government's renewed focus on building the economy as well as fighting climate change. And this is also very closely intertwined with recovery from the pandemic and racial and social justice. So we've handpicked some young professionals, some of whom are Pratt alumni, to share what they do as it relates to these topics, and also be present in breakout rooms afterwards where we can get to know their work and what they do a little more. So without further ado, I'd like to allow Brys to share his screen, and I will introduce him. So Brys Peralta is a current high school senior at Millennium Brooklyn High School. He's been a youth leader at BK Rot since July of 2020. He has since become a large proponent of expanding citywide composting and environmental justice education. He is also passionate about learning foreign languages and the preservation of endangered and indigenous ones, and enjoys making art and arts education programming through his internships at the Guggenheim, MoMA, and Studio Museum Harlem. So Brys, are you able to share your screen?
No. Also, okay. My name is pronounced Brys.
That's Brys. I'm so sorry.
We should be a co-host now, Brys.
Okay. Thank you. So hi, my name is Brys, and I work at BK Rot. I've been there since July 2020, and I will be presenting what I do there now. So a little bit about BK Rot. It initially launched in 2013, and we're the first bike-powered food waste hauling and composting service operating out of central and northern Brooklyn. We're staffed by young people of color ages 16 to 25, and we're operated out of public spaces. So BK Rot's main garden is hosted at No Wasteland Gardens in Bushwick, and we're non-for-profit. So our partner gardens, No Wastelands, was founded in 2015 as part of the Parks Department land, and it's 2,500 square feet, 1,000 of that for composting operations, and we have a windrow composting system on the grounds. And Green Acres, that's where I manage my composting system, was founded in 2001 as part of the New York Garden Trust, part of the New York Restoration Project, where we have a 6-bin composting system and a windrow for curing the compost. So we transport food scraps from the neighborhoods by bike and e-trike. So the top picture is one of the e-trikes, and there's like a trailer with all the bins. And we bring in the food scraps and weigh them just to keep track of how much we're taking in for each week from the clients and residents. And then we also have drop-offs every Sunday from 12 to 3 where people can bring their compost by hand. And we manually process that into compost. So emptying out the bags of food scraps, chopping it up and mixing it with the Brown's materials like wood chips and sawdust and stuff like that. And this is a picture of the windrows. So in this, we're turning them every 2 weeks or so. We have to turn the windrows to aerate them and allow for the bacteria to get oxygen so that it could properly break down all the food. And we do that every 2 weeks for the whole process is a little over 3 months. So it takes like 8 to 9 weeks for everything to break down. And then we get to sifting it after it's been cured and the bacteria has some time to stop working at such a high capacity and breaking down all the food. And then it's turned into fresh compost for residents and community members to use in their gardens and grow food, grow plants, anything that they desire. And it's also sold in retail stores. So these pictures are some of what we've been able to grow with the compost in No Wasteland Gardens. They've been, yeah. So our organic waste intake, this is approximately what we've been having. Over 100,000 tons of organic waste, which is a lot, especially in 2020. So our story through the pandemic, the city actually cut, the city actually cut like 90% from the composting budget. So a lot of the composting efforts were just like completely stopped because of the pandemic. And there was an increase in demand of composting as people were staying in their homes, wondering, now what do I do? How can I like still be a part of, because climate change is still happening, how can I still contribute to stopping it or changing my actions? So we came back and regrounded our values in supporting young people interested in involving themselves in environmental stewardship, contributing to our neighborhood food system, and strengthening our community economy, and building up the local soil. So we launched the inaugural Youth Leaders Program, which I was a part of, where we partnered with the gardens and learned more about composting in general, and also how we can involve ourselves with environmental justice and mutual aid efforts like packaging like food to give out to the community over at University in that little picture in the bottom right. And our residential collection more than doubled. Yes. And as did our drop-off collection. So we had to figure out ways to expand how much we could process, and that's where the partner gardens came in. So these are like our stops that we have to take, and they're like divided up. So we reduced truck traffic in North Brooklyn. North Brooklyn hosts up to 60 diesel exhaust emitting trucks per hour. But we transport all of our food scraps by bike or e-trike, so that cuts a lot of the diesel exhaust that is being produced from picking up all of this waste. And these are our partner gardens. That's me at Green Acres, and there are windrows at, why am I forgetting the name of that garden? But that's another garden also by BK Rock. And those are the youth leaders also turning those windrows and processing the food scraps. We were able to double annual youth wages. And the thing about compost is it binds to lead, so that plants can't take it in as they're growing. So this is just a map of like the like let-in soil around the city. And here's a picture of the garden at No Wastelands, which has now the compost binding to the lead, so it won't continue to persist in the soil. It's also very good at absorbing water and like water retention. So as we've seen like heavier downpours increasing, compost helps to take up some of that water and prevent all of these like flooding problems that we're starting to see more and more because of the worsening climate change. And it also helps to reduce city heat as it helps tree canopies and other greenery grow and like block out the sun coming down on like the asphalt and stuff like that. Yes, that is the entire presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bree. That was great. Really interesting to see how y'all are working toward this and on such a community granular level, because we need it on every level. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? You want to open up the floor? I can ask one. How did you get involved in BK-Rot?
Yeah, so I was just like looking for a summer job, and I've always been like, I've always loved to like garden, and I've been very interested in like helping with like climate change, but I wanted to do something like tangible. And I've always like just being outside, and after the pandemic, I was tired of just kind of doing nothing. And then I found like an Instagram ad asking for youth to apply to the program, and I was like, oh, this looks so cool, and I just applied.
Wow, that's great. Did some of your folks who get involved also?
No, actually. So I live in Park Slope, and BK-Rot like operates out of Bushwick. So I like didn't really know anybody like from the area. I didn't really know Bushwick itself at that point. But as I've been able to work there, I've gotten to know like more of the community in Bushwick and Bed-Stuy, and also bring some of this knowledge and bring the people that I know back to like Park Slope and spread the knowledge.
Where's the closest composting facility to Park Slope that you're aware of? If there's any down there?
I don't know like a physical composting site like how BK-Rot operates. I know Grow NYC has like the food scrap collection at up by the park at forgetting.
The farmers market up
yes,
by
the
Grand
farmers market. I'm just nervous. Up by the farmers market, but I don't know any like place where people can come and process their own food scraps like we do at BK-Rot.
Liana, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I can. I was just wondering how do you think that, like, what's your vision for the future using the knowledge that you've learned here, and are you trying to get a career in sustainable gardening or urban farming, or do you think that it'll be sort of like a secondary thing for you?
I don't know. I want it to be, I want to do like everything in the world, so I don't really know what I want my career to be, but I definitely want to like continue getting other people involved in composting, and just like getting people out there and getting myself out there and composting for anywhere. I mean, I'm going to Middlebury for college, and they also do a lot of composting there, and I'm excited to continue.
James, if you want to ask your question. I can't see you. He's in an Uber. James is asking, is BK-Rot connecting with other composting organizations in New York City to fill the gaps after the city is retreating from composting in 2021?
Yes, I know we're working with organizations like Big Reuse and a lot of other smaller composting like microhauling organizations to just try not only like share tips and stuff like that, but also like fight for the legislation of like improving the resources that groups like BK-ROT and like Save Compost Coalition and all of that can get to expand the like local composting organization capabilities. Also, for young people in this call, Ceci just wanted me to let you all know that we're still hiring for our next youth leaders cohort. So if anybody wants to get involved, I can drop the link really quick.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much. I would like to introduce Summer now. So Summer was born and raised in Southern Maryland and came to New York City to earn a bachelor's in environmental science from NYU. Summer developed her understanding and passion for environmental justice issues there in NYC. In summer 19, Summer completed her MS in Sustainable Environmental Systems, which is also my program, at Pratt Institute, and started her position at Uprose as Energy Democracy Coordinator. So Summer leads many energy democracy campaigns, from developing Sunset Park Solar, New York's first community solar co-op, fighting peaker power plants with the Peak Coalition, and implementing a local just transition through Uprose's community-led comprehensive waterfront plan called the Green Resilient Industrial District Grid. It's a proposal. So Summer works with many partners to support policies and funding that will make renewable energy affordable, accessible, and community-owned for environmental justice communities like Sunset Park. Summer, thank you so much. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ben, and really great to be here today. Of course, anything Pratt related is super fun. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Everyone good? Okay, I think that it is working. You never know with Zoom, but yeah, it's great to be on this amazing panel and see so many familiar and new faces. So I'm going to start off with giving some background about Uprose and Sunset Park, and then go into, because I graduated from the SES program, have to talk about systems and how systems are working and not working together, and how we can move forward from there, really focusing on specific community-led projects. So that's kind of the flow of my presentation. So for a little background for those who might not know, Uprose was founded in 1966 and is Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. We are an intergenerational, multiracial, women of color-led, internationally recognized organization working at the intersection of racial justice and climate change. A little bit about Sunset Park. So Sunset Park is an environmental justice frontline community located in Southwest Brooklyn, with a lot of environmental injustices. Here are just a few examples of them, from having 3 pico power plants within a mile radius of one another, 2 solid waste transfer stations, and then the Gowanus Expressway that traverses the entire community north to south, that sees over 200,000 cars and 25,000 trucks every day. In terms of the last one I mentioned, it's also important to think about how as a society we've also changed and how that impacts our different needs in environmental justice. For example, traffic in the Gowanus Expressway, we are also experiencing and dealing with 3 as of right new distribution centers around the community, 1 exactly in the community and 2 that are a little bit further north, and how our demands within the pandemic and the vast shift from in-person shopping and buying and consumerism has shifted to online, and how that has impacted things like the number, the routes, and the miles driven of diesel trucks that are moving in and out of environmental justice communities, not only like Sunset Park, but for example, also in the South Bronx. Some of you may have seen this meme before. I've doctored it up a little bit to add more context to it. It's really, I want to start with understanding that not only are we in the midst of multiple crises, but why these multiple crises are hitting and impacting environmental justice and frontline communities the hardest. So the original meme here, you see a place, and then you see the three ways of how basically we're in confounding and cumulative impacts of not only the impacts of COVID-19, the housing and economic crisis that it depicted here by the recession wave, as well as the existing, impending, and more frequent impacts of the climate crisis that is felt and seen in different ways throughout different communities. And so here I've added a little bit of context of what is at the foundation of what's making these multiple crises impacting environmental justice communities the hardest. So here are some of that foundation that took years and decades of laying down in this system to make these crises impact the most. And then here on the left use of this meme, you see on the left that different communities are not, we understand that different communities are not impacted the same by all of these impacts. We've spent over a year witnessing different responses of people that we know, that we don't know. We've seen a lot of people posting about, oh, you know, the pandemic has given me so much more time with my family. For some people, and that's great if you're privileged to be able to feel that. But, you know, to also understand that people died, and even before the pandemic, that every day for a lot of people in environmental justice communities was a public health crisis. People with existing conditions, living near peakers, being exposed to PM 2.5 and other noxious gases like NOx and SOx and other pollutants, really impacting not only their health, but then systemically limiting their access to healthcare resources. So I also just want to share that with you all. And some of you may also be familiar with this graphic right here about just transition model. At the root of recovery is a just transition. And I'm going to try to really quickly, I don't know if I can multitask here, actually. I'm going to, let's see. Okay, it's not popping up. I will share it after I finish the slides, but wanting to share a link to the Climate Justice Alliance and really the framework of a just recovery and what that framework is and what that framework looks like. At the heart of that is a just transition. I wanted to share more information on that, but Zoom gymnastics was not working just now, so it's okay, I'll share it after. But understanding that when it comes to recovery, it's not just about the result and having the different kind of goal of like, okay, we're not going to go back to normal. We're going to go back to something, to clean energy instead of fossil fuels, to you know, these types of jobs instead of you know, more green jobs instead of retail jobs or whatever it might be. It's not just about the result, but the just transition at the heart of that is about process and how we move economic, political power from being a very top-down system to one that is a regenerative economy. So one that is shared, one where communities, the most impacted from climate change, COVID-19, all these other multiple crises, are at the forefront of creating these solutions. They're the decision makers. That's where the resources are going to. The most impacted are also the ones making the decisions, self-determination. And so that is really at the heart of recovery, a just recovery, and what is the foundation of a just transition model. So here's just quickly another graphic that's showing how these multiple crises are all confounding and impacting frontline communities the most. And then how we get what I was saying before, that most impact communities need to be at the forefront of the solutions. And so systemically, that's where we're working. This is the no pun intended, the climate we're working in. We're not just looking at emissions reductions. We're not just looking at climate resiliency. We need to look at how COVID recovery is climate recovery, and that these things are not separate, and that how all these things work together to either change an extractive system to a regenerative one or perpetuates one. And so we're working in a lot of different spaces, from policy to planning to advocacy to community engagement, and they're all connected at looking at how to center justice and center equity, and that's by centering frontline community decision making, and that's how we're truly going to get the we're going to achieve resilience, community resilience, climate resilience, COVID resilience, economic resilience, and that only by that process of a just transition will we truly achieve that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our specific work, as Ben mentioned. My introduction, the grid. The grid, which stands for the Green Resilient Industrial District, is a comprehensive community-led plan that really is the result of over a decade of community-based planning that looks at the whole Sunset Park community, at how we really look at land use differently, and how we can use what is existing to create a plan that preserves the industrial character of the Sunset Park waterfront. One thing I didn't mention in the beginning is that Sunset Park is home to New York City's largest significant maritime and industrial area. There are 6 left in New York City, and Sunset Park is the home to the largest one. Retain and create well-paid working class jobs. 41% of Sunset Park residents do not have a high school degree, and is one of the largest walk-to-work communities in the city. So having the access to well-paid career opportunities is really important. Support the green industrial innovation, and then promote climate resiliency and circular industrial economy principles to achieve that regenerative economies. And so it's really about how the notion that industrial sectors should be building for climate resilience, for a climate future. And that a trend that we had seen throughout the city is that, and not just throughout the city, throughout the country, really, industrial sectors, particularly ports, have been disappearing. They've been turning into high-end commercial and residential areas. And in the midst of the pandemic, we saw just how important and necessary industrial areas, local, and the capacity to produce locally was. That we saw international supply chains completely become strained and broken and unreliable. We saw how supply and demand was all over the place. And so the need to produce, particularly when we were where we are 1 year ago, to produce PPE and other immediate needs, that it was only the industrial sector that was able to pivot so quickly to address these needs, and that we can't afford to be losing more industrial land. And it was the grid that helped us win the fight against the industry city rezoning, one of the largest rezonings of New York City history, which glad to go in the deep rabbit hole in the breakout rooms, but not going to spend more time talking about now. Was trying to really push a conventional model of development to, create luxury retail, commercial, hotel uses on the largest industrial waterfront in New York City, which didn't make sense. And so this was the community alternative that ultimately beat that helped defeat the rezoning. And so operationalizing the grid is a part of operationalizing climate policy, which On the city level is the Climate Mobilization Act that includes Local Law 97. Some of you may know that as the Dirty Buildings Bill or law. And then on the state level is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, passed in June of 2019 by New York Renews, a coalition of almost 300 groups. Uprose is a steering committee member and has been part of the CLCPA fight since the beginning. And so all of passing these climate legislations was the first step. It was setting the foundation, and that's not where the fight ended. And so a lot of our work is involved with implementation and what we call operationalizing something on the ground. And so what does this policy look like successfully implemented on the ground? And that is what the grid is an example of. How do we make these policies come to life with grassroots organizing and community-based planning on the ground? What do projects look like? What kind of jobs are we talking about? For who? How do we create access to those jobs? What pots of funding are needed? And how do we move that funding to the necessary projects and entities to see these things come to fruition? And then after all that, how can this become a replicable model, not only for this community, but for the city, the region, nationally of, oh, this is how a community-led just transition looks like. And these are all the necessary steps. Another thing I want to briefly touch on is offshore wind, and that, this is something that Uprose has been calling for on our industrial waterfront for many years. And this past January, the state, NYSERDA, New York State Research and Development Authority, Energy Research and Development Authority, yeah, I'll put that in the chat, just announced the largest offshore wind solicitation in US history. I mean, we're making history here. And part of that announcement included $200 million that would go to the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, located in Sunset Park, really just, like half a mile away. That's to use to turn South Brooklyn Marine Terminal into an offshore wind assembly and staging port, which will create thousands of jobs. And we are very much engaged and working to, ensure that these jobs are benefiting local residents, and understanding what types of jobs those are, what types of requirements, and they call for, and how we can develop programs to create a clear pathway to the diverse jobs that will be created from this project. And then lastly, I want to just mention the Peak Coalition. I mentioned that, Sunset Park has 3 peaker power plants. Peaker power plants are different from regular power plants because they only turn on the highest energy demand days. So think of the coldest and the hottest days of the year, they get turned on basically for extra power. So these power plants get paid by ratepayer dollars to sit there and pollute environmental justice communities. They are usually older, more inefficient, and they use fossil fuels like fuel oil, and sometimes some of the newer ones, natural gas, but they basically make bad pollution days even worse. And they are, of course, predominantly located in environmental justice communities. So happy to answer questions about this afterwards. And basically just the biggest takeaway is that, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's not enough about having a shared vision. It's having an understanding that business as usual processes to get to an end, the means to get to an end has to be different. If we're really going to achieve a just transition, a just recovery, a really, really truly centering equity and justice, that it's about the process. And so what does process mean? It means leadership. Who's making the decisions? It's not just about engagement. Okay, we heard what we got to say. That's a checklist item. But who's actually making the decisions in how things happen, where things happen? Resources. Where is funding happening? Okay, it's not enough just to talk about benefits. Okay, you're going to create X number of jobs. who's getting that funding? How is that funding moving? You know, and who's getting the bulk of the funding? Who's making the decisions about the funding? But it's not just funding and investments. What about incentives? What is getting incentivized, and why is that getting incentivized? How are all these things that we take for granted that are like, oh, that's just business as usual? You know, like that's just how things work. If we're going to truly flip the outcome, we need to flip the process on its head. And then justice. And this I like to think about as being problem oriented instead of solution oriented, understanding the historic context of who's most impacted and why, and what needs to happen, what the most impacted, what do they have to say in order to get to the ends. And so that's the big piece about centering equity and justice. And I'm going to stop there. I feel like I've taken a lot of time, but appreciate any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Summer, that was incredibly inspiring. Yeah, thank you for sharing so much great information on all the great work that Uprose is doing. I think we can all agree that we need to see a lot more work like that throughout our communities. Does anyone have a brief question that they would like to pose to Summer? Wait until the breakout rooms if you want to. Yep, Lionel added a lot of links in the chat, so feel free to check those out. There's a lot of information there, a lot of good work to learn about.
I have a quick question if we have time.
Yeah.
Hi, Summer. Nice to connect with you again. I wanted to ask what skills or experiences prepared you for your work with Uprose, and particularly with just transition work.
Sorry, I missed like the middle part of the question. You said, what are the skills?
What skills and experiences prepared you for your work with Uprose, particularly with working on a just transition?
That's a really good question, and I don't even know the answer to that. So I'm going to just say some things. I think that, I mean, I do think about that there's the place and the need for technical skills in the environmental justice movement. And so it's really about how you show up, you know, if not like coming in and like, oh, this is my vision for, you know, how to do all these things. This is what I'm going to do. That's not how you show up. It's really about how can I support? How can I stand in solidarity? And so one I would say is a mindset, and that we see a lot of extremely qualified, extremely smart people try to come in, and if their mindset is an extractive one of, I'm going to make decisions, I know best, I'm not going to take criticism, and this type of mindset, I know better because I've got, you know, a whole drawer of degrees, then that's causing more harm than help. And so one is mindset. Of course, another one is skills. You know, it's skills as in any jobs, you know, mapping, data, research, writing is a huge one, all these types of skills. And really systems understanding of everything, you know. We have allies and partners all over the place. We, as you may know, partner with Pratt and a lot of studios and other work. We partner with a lot of different types of group and people. And so for us, we'll work, we say we work with people and entities in the interest of justice. And so if there's a community need for that, if there's the technical need for that, we'll do that. But the main priority is really how. And that's really getting back at that process, and why I was like, okay, I really want to hit home this point of the process. How are you going to work with us? How are you going to support? How are you going to show up? How are you going to, take feedback and criticism? And it's really having that humble and resilient mindset that's really key.
Fantastic. Yeah, all skills that I think SES students and GCPE students are working on, because yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you make change. So let's move on to our third speaker.
Yeah, I will introduce. Our third speaker is Bill Calabrese. Sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. I hope that's right.
That was right. Yeah.
Did I? Okay. Okay, perfect. So Bill has been providing strategic planning for the Mayor's Office of Resiliency for 2 years, assisting in the development of One NYC and creating the Climate Adaptation Roadmap, a 30-year action plan for equitable adaptation in New York City. Prior to this, he was a strategic planner for the New York City Housing Preservation and Development and spent 4 years as a senior analyst at HR&A Advisors, where he was deeply involved in many resiliency efforts, including 100 Resilient Cities, New York Rising, and the Rockefeller Foundation's National Disaster Resilience Competition Capacity Building Initiative. In addition to his resiliency work at HR&A, he led analytical project management support on projects ranging from sustainability to large-scale redevelopment planning. Bill has an MS in City and Regional Planning from Pratt Institute, an alum, and a BA in Political Science from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Thank you, Bill, for joining us, and I will pass it on to you.
Thank you, Liana. And yeah, it's great to talk to Pratt people on a gray Saturday. Can't think of anything better to do. So I will now share my screen. Oh, I did not do it. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about our office to start with, and then talk a little bit about my work there. As you can imagine, I think the way that New York City's government response to the climate challenge has been in some ways still very nascent and very much evolving. So the Mayor's Office of Resiliency, this is our kind of like mandate where we strive to adapt New York City to the unprecedented challenge of climate change, creating a more resilient, equitable, and vibrant city for the New Yorkers of today and generations to come. We are sort of like a part of the larger climate issue where our sister office in sustainability is largely tasked with the carbon mitigation side of things and how we reduce our carbon emissions. So this includes like our 2050 carbon neutral goal, the Climate Mobilization Act and Local Law 97, as well as increasing fossil fuel energy sources. And the Office of Resiliency is tasked with climate adaptation, which includes things like flood protection projects, guidelines for resilient design, and we are also responsible for the translation of climate science and local climate monitoring. Some history briefly about kind of like the evolution of our office, because it's a little bit relevant, I think, in terms of like where we've come from and maybe even where we're going, because as we are at a transition point moving towards a new administration, I think it's not a given that we will look the same in our current iteration as we do today. And so we're trying to think about how we're best positioned to address the climate challenge. But we evolved from the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, OLTPS, which is where kind of like Plan NYC originated and a lot of the initiatives around sustainability in the early 2000s. We became the Office of Recovery and Resiliency post-Sandy. And so our office kind of like when it became its own thing and was separated from the carbon mitigation side of climate was really post-Sandy. And our office was designated as kind of like a coordinator of a lot of post-Sandy work and trying to steer and direct a lot of like larger federally funded projects, which of course is not really where, a lot of that's winding down, even if there's still pieces of recovery that are still ongoing from Sandy. And we are beginning to look towards a sort of like new horizon of what does adaptation look like that's more city-led. And if we have more control and more understanding of like what we want a adapted future to be more driven by New York City, like how can we do that proactively and partner with our communities to create those visions and not be so responsive as we were following Hurricane Sandy. So in part of that transition, we did change our name a few years ago to the Office of Resiliency, dropping the recovery and beginning to think more forward-looking. That's not the only kind of like suite of related climate offices. We have the climate policy and programs, which are primarily tasked with One NYC, our sort of like overall city, kind of like the closest thing we have a comprehensive plan, though we're not a comprehensive planning city. They've also are involved on divestment of the city's pension funds from fossil fuels and facilitating kind of our global network relationships. We have emergency management, which is very much tasked with like how you respond to hazards, and that includes climate hazards, and thinking about what our risk profile looks like today and into the future. And then we have housing recovery, which is another one of those Sandy offices that was very much about how we build back our, and responsible for the Build It Back program, but getting people's houses both rebuilt and rebuilt to new standards that can be more resilient. We also work within kind of like a suite of larger planning framework. The post-Sandy plan was the Stronger, More Resilient New York, the special initiative for rebuilding and resiliency. Very much focused on Sandy-like storms, given that this was responding to Hurricane Sandy. This was a plan that was delivered to maximize projects eligible for federal funding and naming specific projects. We also see this as something like, even though it's great and a product of its time, it doesn't necessarily reflect our current understanding of climate hazards. And so we're trying to better position ourselves now towards what that understanding looks like, and being more responsive to the wider array of climate risk that we face, including heat, which is something that sort of kills New Yorkers and puts people in the hospitals every day, but is not something that necessarily that kind of planning was designed to address. And as I mentioned, there's also the One NYC plan, which is released in a major upgrade, I think every 4 years. It's really largely setting goals and principles for a livable city. It also tracks kind of like initiatives on a line-by-line basis every year. But this is like a much more comprehensive plan that addresses, not comprehensive in terms of what you think of as a comprehensive plan, but it's wide in scope. It thinks about healthcare, education, transportation, among many other policy areas. So our office is organized into a number of teams. At the top, you have the director's team and external affairs, but then you have the policy teams, and you can kind of see just like from these teams, like the array of things that we take on, from climate science and risk communication, which is very much about how we build that bridge towards the academic and research communities, as well as translating our understanding of science to policy. We have infrastructure and energy, which overlaps with the Office of Sustainability, thinking both about how we decarbonize our energy systems, but also how we make them more resilient at the same time. We have land use and buildings, which is focused, as you can imagine, on land use and buildings, and thinking about both like the individual structures and assets, and like how you make them more resilient, how you create better financing available to make those kind of retrofits, which sometimes can be less available than some of like the sustainability and energy efficiency upgrades, but also more comprehensively how our land use and codes think about or like begin to incorporate climate risk into them. Social resiliency, which both thinks about social infrastructure such as schools and libraries, and how that is part of our response to the climate crisis, and how we think about the social fabric itself as a very important component of resiliency. But also they are sort of like our most, greater kind of like specialists in heat and heat risk. And then waterfronts, which I think is a lot of what people traditionally think of our office of, like coastal infrastructure, walls and bioswales and things that are on the coast that were like similar to those post-Sandy projects that we were coordinating about how we keep water out of our neighborhoods. And then my team, program coordination delivery, where we do kind of like overarching strategic planning, which is my task, tying together all of these kind of like disparate threads across the office, but also liaising with other kinds of city agencies. And we, as I'll kind of mention in a few moments, we kind of reach across the whole family of agencies in New York City. And then even with OMB in trying to make sure that we are advocating strongly for funding through our budgeting process. So our climate challenge, I don't think it's controversial here to say that it's getting warmer on a global scale, on a US scale, on a New York scale. This is left to right, just sort of a quick infographic, but we know that like it's getting hotter. And this means a lot of different things for us. We are lucky in New York City to have very downscaled climate modeling that gives us pretty good granular understanding of what climate risk looks like throughout New York City and across our different hazards from increased coastal storms, sea level rise, extreme precipitation events and temperature. And this is like what the science tells us. And that is, I think, well established and important as a place to begin. But where our office comes in is trying to translate the science, as I said, into like policy and even just like understand like what this means for New Yorkers. It's great to kind of follow up from Summer's presentation because I think that does a good job of framing how like we understand that risk is not just about like where sea level rise is more concentrated or where you might have more extreme heat, but also about the social conditions and where people are starting from, and understanding that these risks are not going to impact everyone equally, and that factors like race and income are going to drastically affect how people are able to respond to climate risk. And so it naturally has to be part of our response as well. So as like a few kind of examples, we know it's getting hotter, and we know in a place like Bushwick, which is inland, in just a few decades, like average temperatures will be up 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is akin to Birmingham, Alabama in the summer. We'll have increased both heat waves and heat events, but also just persistent heat as well. And there's that's kind of like the science, but then there's a question of like, what does that mean for a senior who lives in housing in an apartment? What does that mean for our social infrastructure, like libraries, which function as cooling centers? How are we channeling investment to make sure that they are equipped to handle increased people needing cooling services? Are they even kind of like up to code currently? Or like, do they have working air conditioners? And as I mentioned as well, like this touches on a variety of agencies, from not even fully city agencies like the library, which are largely nonprofits, to emergency management, parks and recreation, housing, small business services, and the Department of Health and Mental Health. We also have our coastal business districts, and sort of like an iconic one here, like Coney Island, which will also begin to see increasing flooding over the years, which will look like over 6 feet of sea level rise at high tide by the end of the century. This is the high estimate. And this makes us have to think about, what does the viability of businesses look like in an area of increasing vulnerability? Who are these businesses serving, and how and why? And what does this mean for both like the buildings themselves, but what we think about these neighborhoods and how we structure our codes? Similarly, a range of agencies touch here, DOT as well here, DEP, environmental protection, who are tasked with our water quality. Being a commercial district, of course, EDC, the Economic Development Corporation here as well, and FEMA, given that this was an area also touched by Sandy, and is responsible for pre-disaster mitigation. And then we have areas like Astoria, and this is a coastal neighborhood, but there's some inland areas here as well, but increased rain events we know are going to overwhelm our current kind of drainage systems. We actually have a stormwater study that is going to be releasing some maps to show some modeling we've been doing over the past few years in the next, I would say, 6 weeks. So with these increased events, like what does this mean for our street design and how people move around the city? How are we thinking about the streets, the sewers, and the kinds of risks that are born with that? And relatedly are going to touch across a range of agencies. So as I mentioned, or as was introduced in my introduction, one of my main project is the Climate Adaptation Roadmap, where we're thinking about both the risks or the impacts to New Yorkers, both like assets, neighborhoods, and even kind of like individual buildings and the people within them through the end of the century. Given that we have like pretty solid climate modeling through the New York City Panel on Climate Change to 2100. But then we're trying to lay out a more thoughtful and holistic approach through 2050 of like, what are those interventions and mitigations that we're taking to begin addressing that risk? And then what kind of residual risks is there still that will need to be addressed beyond 2050 as we kind of like hit a major threshold where risk does really increase beyond that point, but also from residual risk that is not yet addressed from the prior decades. And we're thinking about interventions beyond kind of like big capital projects and like, you know, your seawalls and things, and thinking about like smaller projects as well as policies, like how we're changing the rules that govern the city and like how we're structured to address the climate crisis, which is something we're thinking about now as we're in that transition, to programs and how we're partnering with communities and addressing specific risks and vulnerable populations, as well as partnerships with our community-based organizations and how we're building better bridges to those who are already serving New Yorkers on the ground, and thinking about how we can have a better relationship to build that bridge and establish a vision where we're kind of hopefully moving to a place where we're more sharing power and beginning to work with New Yorkers in a way to create that vision for an adapted New York City. So again, this roadmap is a strategic plan that will be more of a systems-based approach to adaptation, trying to foster greater equity in our process and outcomes. We've learned a lot in the 8+ years since Sandy, and how as we've been implementing those projects, what we'd want to do differently, and especially what we've learned from the very difficult tasks of cross-agency coordination, and how we can better serve that across, you know, the entire range of a project's planning, design, construction, and operation and maintenance. And then again, really like trying to get a better grasp of like a long-term horizon, given that there's going to be a significant uncertainty for adaptation in those timeframes, but not, you know, being paralyzed by that, and trying to really take that on directly and make sure we're prioritizing this kind of work in a very thoughtful and equitable way. So that is my project presentation.
Thank you, Bill. That was great. Super, super informative. I'll just take one question for now. I'll take the one in the chat just because we're running a little bit short on time, but Alex Miller is asking, if the proposed Department of Sustainability and Climate Change is established, how do you think it can best support all of the other agencies that are involved in climate mitigation and adaptation projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like That's kind of like a really great question. And there's been some proposals out there for, like a climate agency that kind of centralizes everything, and also institutionalizes the climate problem in something that is more of an agency and not kind of like a mayor's office, which is kind of how we're organized currently, which has some benefits, I think, in our current setup, but also some drawbacks. So if we are taking it on in a singular way where we're thinking about sustainability and carbon mitigation alongside resiliency, I think that's a direction we need to head in any case. And we need to think both about, like, even like in our resiliency work, like how are we thinking about risk reduction in a way where we're factoring in what the carbon footprint of those mitigations are. And we're thinking about, again, just like the longer term impacts from these projects, and not trying to make like sort of like short-sighted decisions just based, again, on, like, for example, just like keeping water out of a neighborhood, if that's not going to be viable in the long term, and ultimately might not necessarily align with some of our carbon mitigation strategies. So it's difficult and complex. So that's something I think we're very much trying to figure out currently.
Definitely difficult and complex. Maybe some centralization could help in that, but yeah. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And there were a few other questions in the chat. Maybe if you want to look at it before your breakout room, we can address it there.
Great.
But I am going to introduce our last speaker, last but definitely not least, Joanna Reynolds. And Joanna is the Associate Director of the Made in NYC initiative at Pratt Center, where she focuses on overall strategy and growth for the program that supports New York City's manufacturers and makers. Prior to joining the Pratt Center, Joanna worked as a field marketing specialist at Zipcar, building strategic local marketing partnerships and increasing new Zipcar members in Queens, Brooklyn, and New Jersey. She started her career in local economic development at the Myrtle Avenue Brooklyn Partnership, working to support predominantly Black and women-owned neighborhood businesses on Myrtle Avenue. While at Myrtle Avenue, she worked closely on community development and arts projects that supported BIPOC artists, entrepreneurs, and local NYCHA residents. Through Myrtle Avenue, she was connected with Afropunk, where she ran the artist and food markets for the annual festival, spotlighting Black arts and food makers. Joanna has a master's degree in urban planning from NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School for Public Service and a BA in sustainable urban development and studio arts from the University of Rochester. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us, and please take it away.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today. I'm going to quickly share my screen and then I'll get started. So let's move that. Give me 1 second. All right, this looks good. You can all see it. Perfect. So as Aliana mentioned, I'm Joanna Reynolds, the Associate Director for Made in NYC. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Made in NYC is, and then keep going. So Made in NYC is a local branding initiative that supports New York City's vibrant manufacturing and maker community. Made in NYC helps local manufacturers and makers to grow through marketing and branding resources, valuable skill building opportunities, and an access to a supportive community of peers. We primarily focus on helping companies with marketing and branding assistance, although we are starting to expand. And this year we offered our first ever sustainable packaging workshop, teaching local makers how to grow their own packaging using mycelium. So realizing that sustainability and sustainable processes are becoming more and more important to our businesses. So Made in NYC is a membership-based initiative. Right now we have over 1,400 member businesses and growing. They're making everything from hot sauce to handbags or neon signs or compost. BK Rot is actually Made in NYC member and is part of our community. And we are supporting businesses who are everywhere from the Bronx to Staten Island, Queens, you know, all 5 boroughs. Made in NYC, I should mention, is an initiative of the Pratt Center for Community Development, which is a community-driven planning and development organization that works for a more just and sustainable New York City. And Pratt Center is a part of Pratt Institute. Made in NYC, we're a nonprofit initiative and we're generously supported by the New York City Council and the Garment District Alliance. So I'm going to talk a little bit, go back in the archives and talk a little bit of the history of how Made in NYC started, as well as some of the work that we've done to support green jobs and sustainable processes. And then I'll dive in, I'll end talking about how we were working during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Made in NYC was founded during a major crisis in New York City. It was founded right after 9/11. As a project of the New York Industrial Retention Network, which was known as NYRN. That is an organization that no longer exists, but was how we were started. At the time, manufacturing was declining for a variety of reasons, although there was still a lot of vibrant manufacturing here. And 9/11 really created a shock to the city's economy, and NYRN wanted to be a part of that sort of recovery. So after 9/11, as a way to contribute to the rebuilding of New York City, Made in NYC was born. It was seen as a way for New Yorkers to sell to each other and help each other in a moment of crisis. And Made in NYC started with just 200 companies, and now we are at almost 1,500, at 1,400 and growing. So the manufacturing sector in New York City, part of why keeping the local manufacturing economy resilient was so important is that historically manufacturing provides quality, stable jobs that are craft and skill-based and that do not necessarily require a college education. And maintaining the industry is a really important part of keeping an equitable workforce here in New York City. All New Yorkers need jobs that are well-paying, safe, stable, and contribute to a sustainable future. And we strongly value both building a strong workforce, but also supporting entrepreneurship. And in the work that Made in NYC is doing now currently, we are centering BIPOC and women-owned businesses primarily in our work. This is now going back in time a little bit to talk about some of the work that Made in NYC and Pratt Center did in sustainability and the green economy. So an emerging priority is right after when Made in NYC was funded was the need to support a green industrial economy through a program called Spec It Green. This program was way before my time at Made in NYC, but identified green manufacturers who could provide building materials to developers and architects who are trying to get LEED certification. And the Spec It Green initiative built manufacturers' awareness of green products locally through events that connected them with designers and purchasers. So it's really about building that network and connecting businesses to each other. Some more examples. So Made in NYC, as I mentioned, was founded as a part of NYRN, but eventually became part of the Pratt Center. And NYRN all of NYRN's policy work in the industrial sector kind of got enveloped into Pratt Center and Made in NYC. And Made in NYC, as time went on, our membership started to include more direct consumer, high quality, high-end products, many artisanal handmade products, small batch manufacturing. And there was really a strong movement towards consumers buying locally made products, especially after the 2008 economic recession. There was this shift to focus on buying local and telling local maker stories, and that became more and more central. And Made in NYC was, our value in this space was always around marketing and branding, and that became more and more important. The Made in NYC brand and logo, as well as our connection to Pratt Institute and its faculty and staff who are experts in creativity as well as marketing, really gave us a unique position to serve New York City's manufacturers and makers with marketing and branding assistance and really capitalizing on that local brand. So quickly shifting again, I want to talk a little bit around a program that was not part of Made in NYC, but was a Pratt Center project that it felt silly to not mention it at all, even though it was not really specific to Maine NYC's manufacturing work or was done under the Maine NYC brand, but was a program, Pratt Center project called Green Jobs, Green New York. That was a statewide initiative that promoted energy efficiency, conservation, and clean technologies. And one of the goals was to create green job opportunities for an emerging unemployed and displaced workforce. So just wanted to bring this up because it was a large project that Pratt Center worked on where they were really involved in helping to sustain green jobs in New York City. So now fast forwarding to where we are now. We all know that this year has presented unprecedented challenges to everyone in the world, really globally, but in New York City and to our small businesses, our manufacturers have had a really tough year. But our businesses during the pandemic pivoted and innovated to stay resilient, to keep their businesses alive, be able to keep their workers employed, and to support local New Yorkers. Maine NYC also pivoted. We had to change the way we were doing things to offer safe virtual support to all of our companies, fostering skill building and community to the New York City manufacturing sector during a really tumultuous time. Many of our businesses started making face shields, masks, and hand sanitizer for essential workers and New Yorkers, and they continue to persist through really difficult circumstances and fighting violently to keep their doors open and carry on with creativity and motivation. So as I mentioned, we had a lot of businesses who pivoted their production to support the COVID-19 pandemic, producing locally here instead of, there was a shortage of a lot of supplies. So even shipping them or having them made elsewhere wasn't even really an option at that point. And we had local makers who supported the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the fight for racial justice. So Maine NYC worked to organize PPE donations for Black-owned community groups who are on the front lines of Black Lives Matter protests so that they could protest safely with masks and other supplies that they needed. So, Maine NYC members were really supporting all aspects of the crises that we have experienced specifically over the last year. Going to wrap it up just by saying that part of the reason I started with how Maine NYC was founded, because we were started right after the aftermath of 9/11 as the way to engage New Yorkers to shop locally and to get local businesses to connect with each other and to sustain local supply chains. And similar to the moment we're in right now, it was a time when celebrating and uplifting New York City, its small businesses and communities was critically and essentially important, especially as we embark on a just and sustainable recovery. So before I end, I'm just going to quickly also pitch that to head over to Maine NYC's Instagram page. I'll drop it in the chat because all month long, we're going to be featuring businesses of ours who are deploying sustainable sourcing processes and have sustainable missions in their business models. And we're going to be featuring them on our Instagram all month long for the month of April. And so if you want to learn more about our businesses, all of our businesses, but specifically those who are engaging in the green economy and sustainable manufacturing, definitely check that out for the rest of the month. And that's all I got. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Joanna. That was awesome. So important for both sustainability practices and community resiliency. So that's amazing. Does anyone, before we transition, does anyone have any burning questions for Joanna? Otherwise, we can move along into our breakout rooms.
So I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's here. And nonprofits and government agencies are tremendously important. And they also contract a lot of work to private sector companies. So Eric and Silvia, who are here with us today as well, can speak more to the private sector and what it's like working on that end. But it's really a very holistic approach that needs to be taken from community organizations like Bree and Summer talked about, and Joanna and Mayor's Office of Resiliency, as we all discussed. You know, there's so much interlocking work that needs to be done and has been done. So I think it's important to keep that in mind moving forward. So that'll be possibly a topic of discussion in the breakout rooms as well.
So before we move on to the breakout rooms, Ben mentioned Eric and Silvia. I just wanted to also read their bios because we didn't get to hear from them for a presentation, but just kind of about what their work, see if you'd be interested in maybe talking with them more in depth within the breakout rooms. So just quickly, so Silvia Del Fava is an urban planner who graduated from Pratt's GCPE SES program in 2019. She currently works at BFJ Planning as a senior planner. Her interest in planning with a particular focus on resilience and sustainability stems from a strong passion for cities and their 21st century challenges. So short and sweet. And if you're interested in speaking with Silvia, she'll be in one of the breakout rooms. And then finally, we also have Eric, and Eric Olsen is a project resilience led and landscape designer for AECOM's NYC. Sorry, Eric, if that's pronounced differently. Landscape studio with 8 years of professional experience in landscape architecture, urban design, and community engagement. His professional experience encompasses a wide array of projects spanning from many scales and regions, highlighted by a focus of work in the public sector. He has worked on a variety of high-profile projects in the United States and abroad, including coastal resilience projects, downtown parks, streetscapes, urban plazas, and institutional and corporate campuses. A highlight of Eric's work is a devotion to long-term resilient and sustainable futures in urban areas with a focus on inclusive community participation. This is highlighted by his role as a community engagement project leader for the Rebuild by Design Hudson River project, where Mr. Olsen developed and directed a community engagement process that he won the APA New Jersey Outstanding Community Engagement Award in 2019. He has served in both design, leadership, and project management capacities as a part of large multidisciplinary teams overseeing projects from conceptual design through construction and documentation. So the way the breakout rooms are going to be set up, Leonel opened them up. And basically you're free to go into whichever breakout room you want. And then if you want to switch, you can come back to the main room and then go pick another speaker that you'd like to talk to.
Yeah, and we've named the rooms for each of the speakers and participants. So find your room and go there, please. And I'll manage it from this end. If there are rooms that aren't filling up, if you want to join another room, just let me know. And I can stay a little bit after too if the conversation keeps going, but I'll leave it up to the speakers and our guests how long they want to stay.
Yeah, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for coming. And the event was set to end around 2, so if you could just keep that in mind when you're taking the speakers, they've already generously spent an hour and 20 minutes with us.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to jump into a breakout room now.
I'm being textually challenged. Where are the breakout rooms?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
me too.
You're not alone, Summer.
If you go to the bottom, like where you the screen share, you'll see a breakout room option.
I don't.
Like click on the arrow of the share screen, or
If you hover over, you might need to expand your window so that you can see a more button. And if you click on the more 3 dots reticence button, then you get some more options. Breakout room should be in there. And then when you click on breakout room, a window opens.
And in
Then you
that
can choose your
window,
room.
if you hover over the number towards the right-hand side, then a join option comes up.
I can assign you.
yeah,
someone.
can you like force me into that room? Okay, thanks.
Have fun.
Okay, I'm gonna join Silvia's because there's no one in there.
Hey.
Yeah, Ron.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Amran.
Hello.
Sorry. Y'all tell me what room I should go in.
Whichever one you want. I think there's at least one person in each room. Oh, Sylvia's on her own.
Yeah.
Are there no planners in here? You guys go in there. Chat with her.
All right, I'm going to see her.
Doesn't matter where I go.
There's one. Ben is with Joanna, and then there's one person with Bree.
I'll go in with Silvia for now, and then I can jump into a different one if it's lacking people.
Maybe
Sounds
somebody
good.
could go in with Bree.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to go in with Bree?
I mean, for a little bit, but if you wanna do some networking, that's part of the point too. So go to whichever one you prefer.
I'll go in with Bree for now.
James, are you good? James ain't here right now. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go. Oh, here he is.
I was trying to just yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Is everything still okay? My internet just crashed and I got kicked out. Is everybody still in
Yeah.
rooms?
Yeah, everyone's still in rooms. I think I was made the host because or something. I just assigned James to
Okay,
a
good.
room.
Sounds good. Yeah, as James was starting to speak, it just froze. Oh, there it is again. Okay. You might need to take over, Liana.
Okay, do you want me to make you the host again or?
Just keep the privileges. You can go into the room. Well, actually, you know what? If you're automatically made host when I leave, I think that's okay. I can stay host just so I have purview here, and just message me if you think it's time to close the rooms or whatever.
Okay. I'm making you host and then yeah, I'm co-host. Okay.
Go network.
All right. I don't even know who to go to.